Can we build a Layen's hive with just one saw and a drill? Hi, I'm B-Boy Bill. Let's get to work. We're going to start with getting our 2x10s ripped down to size. I'm using the rip cut to cut all the 2x stock down to 8 7/8. It's an awesome tool to use for this because you set it once and you can make the same cut over and over again. If you haven't checked out the rip cut, there's a link for it in the description below. You might have noticed that this lumber isn't the standard size, and that's because I don't have a truck. I had to cut this in the Home Depot parking lot so I could fit it in my car. Now that the wood's ripped to the right width, we're going to get the Craig rip cut off here and do our cross cuts. Let's start by cutting all our ends first. First thing I needed to do was square up the end of this stock. When I cut it in the Home Depot parking lot, I was using a jigsaw and all my ends didn't come out perfect. As always, this is not a safety video, but just for future reference, I will not be cutting wood on these little slats. I thought I could get a better video for you guys, but I had too many problems with the saw kicking back and other issues that I gave up and just moved it over to the end here. I'm cutting all these ends to 16 and 11/16. Now that our ends are all done, we're going to cross cut for our front and back. The front and back are all going to be 21 7/8. And if you don't feel like writing down these numbers, I put together a build guide and you can find the link in the description below. In the build plans, you can find all these numbers, plus step-by-step instructions and diagrams to go along with them. All right, now that we got everything cut to size, we're going to go ahead and make our rabbets. Making a rabbet with a circular saw is just a matter of running over and over and over, making a bunch of tiny little sliver cuts. This particular rabbet on the bottom of the hive is 7/16 of an inch, and I cut that rip fence just the right width so that when I install it, I can line it right up with the bottom of the board. The width of the rip fence is determined by the shoe size of your circular saw and how far it is away from the blade. It'll probably be different for yours, so I didn't include an exact measurement. Now we're going to set the saw up for those pocket rabbets on the ends. The pocket rabbets are also 7/16 of an inch, but the depth of the saw is a little different. And then a quick test cut and measure the depth. We're ready to go. We're going to use a technique called a plunge cut to get the rabbets on the ends. That's because the rabbet doesn't go all the way to the end of the wood. I marked the pockets out of this rabbet. They're about 1 1/16 from each end. And then I plunge the saw in and run it across to each line. In this part of the video here, I have the wood screwed into the edge of the workbench. This works really well keeping the wood in place. With this next piece, I didn't screw it into the workbench because I was trying to get a better camera angle so you could see exactly what was going on. But I don't recommend doing it this way. It definitely wasn't as safe. Now we're going to rip the rabbet in the top sides for the frame rests, and then we'll go through with a chisel and clean up all that material. This rabbet here is for the frame rest. It's going to be 3/8 by 7/16 when it's done. This will be the top of the hive where the frames sit. You can also see I learned my lesson here as I'm screwing every piece into the workbench. All right, now that we got all our rabbets cut, we're just going to go ahead and clean them out with a chisel. I found it best to knock what I could loose with the hammer first before I actually start chiseling. That way there wasn't as much work to do. So our rabbets on the ends, you got to be real careful with, guys, because they will snap off. I have done that in the past. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line. We're going to drill some holes in here just to make it a little easier to chisel out without breaking the end off. Here's a little trick I learned in high school. I measured the drill bit, put a little piece of masking tape on, and now I know how far the drill bit's going into the wood. I use this technique a couple times throughout this video. now that our sides and ends are all ready, we're going to go ahead and cross cut the bottom board and we'll be ready to assemble the hive. For this hive design, there's no reason to rip the bottom boards. All we need to do is cross cut them at 23 3/8 of an inch. The front, back, sides, and bottom boards are all cut, so now we're going to start putting them together, and I'm going to use dowels to hold them together and a dowel jig. You can see here I'm measuring for where the dowels are going to go and marking them on both boards. Then I use the dowel jig to go ahead and mark the center of each hole. After I had all the centers marked, I used a punch to make a divot for the drill bit. I found it much easier to do it this way, as the drill bit could go right in the divot, and then I could set the dowel jig down where it needed to be. Once I had all the holes drilled, I went ahead and test fitted the dowels and made sure that everything fit together nicely. Now we're going to assemble the bottom of the hive. I'm going to do this upside down, so when I flip it over, I'll have a nice level surface to put the next layer on. It's important to pre-drill the holes so you don't split your stock. Here I am marking the holes. They're about 2 inches from each side and about 3/4 inches from the edge. I'm pre-drilling these holes with a 9/64 inch drill bit. Once the ends are all pre-drilled, I line them up with the front and back and pre-drill before I put the screws in. I'm using 3-inch long deck screws here. I guess my mind kind of wandered here because I accidentally put the glue on the wrong side of the board and had to wipe it off. This glue has worked out really good for me. It's Type Bond 3 and I use it on all my hive equipment. It's waterproof and I've been very happy with the results. One of the boards was a little warped, so I had to come up with this method here and straighten it out before I screwed it together. I just used a rubber mallet I had laying around and it seemed to work great. Now that our sides and ends are all screwed together, it's time to install our bottom board. This is the only downside of dry fitting your pieces, getting all the pegs back out. Glue the bottom board, put the pegs back in, reassemble it. Then we'll go ahead and glue the insides of our Rabbet and install the bottom board using some 1 1/4 inch screws. If you're finding this content valuable, please hit that like button. It helps others find the channel and lets me know that I'm on the right track.
All right, now that the bottom of the hive is done, we're going to go ahead and get our next layer on, and I'm going to use some dowels and a dowel jig for that.
I'm going to use a very similar process that we did on the bottom board, but first I have to line the dowel jig up for the wider stock. Once the dowel jig's all set up, I measure for where my pegs are going to go, and then I go ahead and use the dowel jig to mark the centers of them. By using the punch and creating that divot, it makes my life so much easier, as I said before. If you haven't tried it this way, go ahead and try it. It'll make your dowel jig work a lot smoother. When working with a dowel jig, I always work off the same edge. In this case, I'm using the front edge of the board. There's a chance that the dowel jig isn't perfectly centered in the middle of the board, and I want to make sure the dowels line up perfectly when I put it back together. I'm also marking each piece so I know which side goes to which when I put it back together. Using the dowels to join the wood together does take a bit longer than using the tongue and groove, but if you don't have a table saw, this is a great solution. What are you guys working on in your shop this week? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Now that we have the front and back all drilled for the dowels, we'll go ahead and repeat the process on the ends. And we're ready to start gluing this together. I go ahead and put a bead glue down and make sure I get it in all the little dowel holes. It is a little risky. I did not dry fit this, but it was such a pain to get the dowels out. I didn't want to go through that process again. I knew I had the drill bit set to the right depth, so I didn't have to worry about the pegs not going in all the way. And using the punch to line up the drill bit worked perfectly and got my holes exactly where I wanted them. I don't know if it's completely necessary to clamp the hive together at this point, but I erred on the side of caution. Normally when working with pegs to join wood together, you definitely want to clamp.
Oh, another broken drill bit.
You see I'm wedging a little breaker bar in. This is to make sure I have good clearance with the frame and the frame rest.
While that glue's drying on our hive, we're gonna go ahead and get the pieces cut for our lid.
The plywood we're cutting here is 26 5/8 by 18 7/16. This will be the top of the lid. I Out of the rest of the 1x8, we're going to rip some 15 by 16th inch pieces. These will be the lid rests. Once we have the lid rests done, we'll go ahead and make some 2.5 inch rips. Then we'll cross cut the 2.5 inch pieces. The first two are going to be 26 and 5/8, and the second two are going to be 16 and 15/16. We'll follow that up by cross cutting for our lid rest. Two of these will be 26 and 3/8, and the other two will be 16 and 11/16.
We're going to put this lid together, and if you missed the last part, we are using the longest drill bit I could find because I broke my other one. Other than that, there's no reason for a bit this long.
I'm pre-drilling all the holes again using that 9/64 inch drill bit, and then I'm going to glue and use 1 1/4 inch deck screws to hold the frame together. Once the frame's all glued up, we'll go ahead and glue on the lid, and again use those 1 1/4 inch deck screws.
All right, now that our hive's all glued up, it's time to put our entrance holes and our vent holes in it.
I'm going to put 2 vent holes right in the center of the hive. These are 1 1/4 inch vent holes, and they're about 3 inches apart from each other. Now that the holes are drilled in, I'm going to cover them with some wire mesh. This will keep any mice out. Here I'm moving on to the entrance holes. The entrance holes are 1.5 inches in diameter, so I need to change the drill bit. These holes are about 5.5 inches from each end and 2 inches up from the bottom. As you notice, I'm drilling them at a slight angle. This is so that any water goes in will run right out. I've used the more elongated entrances in the past, but I found that they're more difficult to cover up for winter, and they're difficult to reduce during robbing. So I thought this would be a better alternative, and I could use entrance discs over the hole. The last holes we're going to drill are for the vents in the lid. And these holes are all 1/2 inch in diameter, spaced evenly out across the ends. Again, we're putting a slight angle on the hole so that any water gets in the hole will run out. These holes in the lid aren't readily accessible by the bees, and they won't be able to monitor them. For that reason, I'm using window screen. Window screen will keep all the unwanted insects out. I just took apart an old screen I had laying around and repurposed it.
Now that all our holes are cut, it's time to go ahead and put our lid rest on.
The lid rest is going to be 1/2 inch from the top, and I start with the ends. As you can see, I'm using some glue, clamping them on, pre-drilling, and then using 1 5/8 inch deck screws. Once the ends are done, I move on to the front and back, repeating the process. Although you don't have to measure on the front and back, just line them up with the lid rest on the ends. Here I'm just using a sanding block to chamfer the edge at a 45-degree angle. This is like a drip edge that allows the water to run off the edge of the lip.
All right, now that our lid rest is on and our holes are drilled, the only thing left is to put the flashing on.
This is a 20-inch wide roll of flashing, so it works out perfect to cover the lid. I'm just cutting it to length. And then I'm going to go ahead and line it up, measure, and trace all the way around the edges where I want the bends to be. A viewer pointed out a while back you can make your own brick, and I did a little research on that and I came up with one specific for these hives. Depending on the size and type of hive I'm building, I can change the blade width to bend the lids for different sizes. This was a really simple design, but the results were impressive, and I'm happy that I built this. I think in the future I'll make some type of stop to keep the metal from going so far in. This would eliminate the need to screw every piece down. I'm securing the flashing on the lid with some 3/8" staples. I also hammered in the corners of the flashing to prevent any cuts in the future.
All right, last step, the final piece, entrance discs.
The center of the disc is going to be 5.5 inches away from the edge and about 3 3/8 inches up from the bottom. Even though you measured them, it's best to line up the entrance hole with the hole in the disc and make sure that is correct. These are just some sheet metal screws that seem to work great for this. They have a really wide head on them.
And there you have it, a whole Layen's hive built with just one saw and one drill. I guess it can be done. This particular hive is special to me. I'm going to give this to a friend of mine. He's been a good friend of mine for a few years now, and he's looking to get into beekeeping. He asked for a hive. He was going to buy it, and I thought, you know, I can't charge my friend for a hive. So I'm going to give this to him. He's going to be able to watch this video and see how I did it, and I hope it works really well for him. I'm B-Boy Bill. We'll see you next time.